The problem, the little girl said, her voice cutting through the tense silence of the boardroom, is that to achieve an 18% return with your stated risk parameters, your algorithm would need a success rate of 98.6%. That isn't just improbable. It's a mathematical impossibility. She slid a glossy photo of a campus across the polished table. And this solar array, it would never be able to power the systems you claim to have. The lights wouldn't even stay on. She looked up her gaze, pinning the two stunned executives in their expensive suits. "Mr. Blackwood is very creative with his numbers," she said, "but he really should have checked them twice." She leaned forward just slightly. "He sent you, didn't he?" This little girl just declared war with nothing but the truth. What would you risk for a chance at justice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and to find out how they ended up in this impossible situation and what happens next, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a moment of the story. The ticker on the television screen was a venomous whisper in the quiet of the grey apartment. Blackwood Capital CEO Victor Blackwood defends controversial return-to-office mandate amidst record profits and layoffs. James Reynolds pressed the mute button on the remote, but he couldn't silence the voice in his head. Victor's voice slick and condescending, echoing in the cavernous boardroom just 2 months prior. "If you have time for a coffee shop, you have time for the office. We're a family here, and a family shows up." A bitter laugh escaped James's lips, rattling the ice in his whiskey glass, the last of his fine collection. "Family," he muttered to the reflection of a ghost in the window. "You don't fire family for disagreeing with you." He had been the COO, Victor's partner, his supposed best friend for 30 years. He had built that empire right alongside him, and when Victor had unveiled his brutal efficiency plan, James had fought it. He had argued for the loyal long-term employees, the ones with families and mortgages, the ones who had bled for the company. For that sin, for that single act of defiance, he was the first to be cast out. His assets were tangled in legal battles, his reputation systematically dismantled by Victor's PR machine. He was erased. The silence of the apartment was a crushing weight. For a man who once commanded thousands, whose days were a symphony of ringing phones and urgent meetings, the quiet was the most profound evidence of his fall. Driven by a despair that the 4 walls could no longer contain, he pulled on a worn coat and walked out into the relentless Chicago rain. The city lights, once a testament to his success, now bled into blurry constellations of mockery on the wet pavement. He walked without purpose, letting the cold rain soak through his collar, a physical chill to match the one in his soul. He was just another shadow in a city full of them. And then he saw her. Huddled under the faded green awning of a closed bookstore was a small, still figure. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, sitting cross-legged on a flattened piece of cardboard, a threadbare blanket draped over her small shoulders. Before her, arranged with surprising order, was a menagerie of delicate paper animals. James almost kept walking. In his old life, he certainly would have. But he stopped. It wasn't pity that held him there, but a strange sense of recognition. In her posture, in the determined set of her small jaw, he saw not a victim, but a president of a very small, very fragile corporation, holding a board meeting with the rain. He knelt the damp concrete, seeping through the knee of his trousers. "That's a nice-looking fox," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. The girl looked up. Her eyes were startlingly alert, possessing a depth and a weariness that didn't belong on a child's face. "He's my favorite," she replied, her voice clear and steady, with no trace of a pleading whine. "He's smart. He knows how to survive." "I'll take him," James said. He pulled a crumpled $20 bill from his pocket. In fact, how much for the entire inventory? He learned her name was Sophia. He learned her grandmother was in the hospital. He took her to a nearby diner where she devoured a grilled cheese sandwich with a focused intensity that broke his heart. While she ate, she took a napkin and a pen from the waitress and began to scribble. James glanced over, expecting childish doodles. What he saw were complex geometric proofs, elegant and intricate. He watched as she carefully, almost unconsciously, wrapped half of her sandwich in another napkin and tucked it deep into the pocket of her worn jacket. He found himself saying words he hadn't planned. "I have a spare room. It's warm. You can stay. Just until we figure things out." The next morning, James attempted to make breakfast. He was a man who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers, but he was completely defeated by 2 eggs and a frying pan. He presented a plate to Sophia with a sigh. On it was a blackened, rubbery mass. "Well," James said, trying for a smile, "this is a deconstructed omelette. It's a very avant-garde culinary concept." Sophia looked at the plate, her small face completely serious. She poked the burnt offering with her fork. Based on the level of carbonization, she stated, looking him right in the eye, "You exceeded the optimal heat-to-protein coagulation ratio by approximately 47%. The smoke detector," she added, pointing a thumb towards the ceiling, "seems to agree." James stared at her for a long moment, and then he did something he hadn't done in months. He laughed. It was a real laugh, deep and genuine. The call came 2 days later. It was from Rebecca Harper, the social worker he had contacted. Her voice was kind, but firm. "Mr. Reynolds, I have some news about Sophia's grandmother. He met her in the sterile beige waiting room of a downtown hospital. The air smelled of disinfectant and quiet grief." "I'm so sorry," Rebecca said softly. "Her grandmother's stroke was too severe. She passed away peacefully this morning." The words hung in the air. Sophia was no longer just a child with a sick relative. She was an orphan. Alone. James felt the world shift under his feet. The crushing weight of his own failure suddenly seemed insignificant next to the vast emptiness that had just opened up in this little girl's life. His despair, his anger at Victor, it all receded, replaced by a fierce, protective clarity. A week later, he stood in a small, wood-paneled family courtroom. Rebecca stood beside him. Sophia sat quietly, her small hand holding his. The judge, a man with tired eyes, peered down at him over his spectacles. "Mr. Reynolds, I've reviewed your file. Your financial situation is precarious, to say the least. Your employment status is non-existent. What exactly can a man who has lost everything possibly offer this child?" The question was a hammer blow meant to expose his inadequacy. And for a second, the old shame, the old failure threatened to swallow him whole. But then he felt a small squeeze from Sophia's hand. He looked down at her, at this tiny, brilliant survivor who saw the world in numbers and patterns, who understood the science of a burnt egg and the art of survival. He looked back at the judge, his spine straightening his voice, finding a power he thought he had lost forever. "Everything he has left, Your Honor," James said, his voice clear and resonant in the quiet room. He took a breath, his path suddenly undeniably clear. "I'm petitioning for permanent adoption. I'm offering her a father. And I'm offering her a home." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm offering her a second chance. For both of us." The months that followed were a quiet reconstruction. The stark, empty apartment, once a monument to James's failure, slowly began to breathe again. A towering whiteboard, purchased on a whim, became the new centerpiece of the living room, a canvas for the beautiful, chaotic symphony of Sophia's mind. It was covered in theorems and calculations, that James, a former titan of finance, could barely comprehend. His nightmares of falling stock prices and Victor Blackwood's triumphant sneer were gradually replaced by a new, more peaceful routine. The soft scratching of Sophia's pencil on paper, the smell of slightly burnt toast in the morning, and the shared silence of two lonely souls learning how to be a family. He learned to braid her hair, his clumsy fingers fumbling with the strands until she would patiently take over. She learned that the refrigerator would, in fact, still be full of food tomorrow. The ghosts of their pasts were still there, lingering in the shadows, but for the first time in a long time, they were not alone with them. The invitation arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope that felt like a relic from another life. The Chicago Tech Gala, an event he had once chaired. His first instinct was to throw it in the trash, another painful reminder of the world he had lost. But Sophia, peering over his shoulder, saw the glossy card. "Is that a party?" she asked, her eyes wide, with a childlike curiosity that was blessedly normal. "Does it have fancy food?" James looked from the invitation to her hopeful face, and the wall of cynicism around his heart cracked. "Yes, Sophia," he sighed, a small smile touching his lips. "I imagine it has the fanciest food." Walking into the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was like stepping back into his own nightmare. He could feel the eyes on him, the whispers that followed in their wake, like a cold draft. "Is that James Reynolds? I heard he lost everything." "Look at him. And who's that little girl? He was a ghost at the feast, a cautionary tale in a sea of tailored suits and polite predators." A kind face emerged from the crowd. Margaret Chen, a board member who had quietly expressed her condolences after his ousting, greeted him with a warm hug. "I'm so glad you came, James," she said, her presence a small island of comfort in a hostile sea. The main event was the keynote address from the man of the hour, Victor Blackwood himself. He took the stage with the practiced charisma of a televangelist, his smile radiating a confidence that bordered on divine right. His speech was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak, an attempt to reframe his brutal layoffs as a stroke of genius. And with our proprietary AI optimization model, Phoenix, we have streamlined our workforce for maximum efficiency and shareholder value. Blackwood announced, his voice booming through the speakers. Tough choices were made, yes, but they pave the way for a stronger, more agile future. This isn't just about cutting costs. It's about a new paradigm of human capital synergy. A wave of polite, obligatory applause rippled through the room. It was then that a small, clear voice, barely more than a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the noise, reached their table. "His math is wrong." James froze, looking down at Sophia. She was staring at the massive projection screen behind Blackwood, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't trying to cause a scene. She was simply stating a fact, as if observing that the sky was blue. Blackwood, who hadn't heard, continued. "Phoenix is revolutionary." "It's not," Sophia said a little louder this time, her voice carrying in a lull in the applause. This time heads turned. Blackwood stopped, his smile tightening. "I'm sorry," he asked, a dangerous edge to his voice. "Did someone say something?" Sophia pointed her fork at the complex data visualization on the screen. "Your AI model," she said, her voice steady and unafraid. "It has a recursive error in its core logic. It fails to account for the compounding degradation of institutional knowledge when terminating experienced employees. The efficiency gains you're projecting are a statistical illusion." She took a small bite of her dinner roll, then added, "It's not an efficiency model. It's just a purge." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the ballroom. You could have heard a stock certificate drop. Blackwood's face, broadcast on two giant screens, went from tanned and confident to a blotchy, furious red. For a moment he was speechless. Then from the back of the room, a slow, deliberate clap began. It was Walter Simmons, a grizzled, universally respected hedge fund manager. He was looking at Sophia with an expression of pure, unadulterated astonishment. Soon another person joined in, then another. It wasn't a wave of support for James, but a spontaneous acknowledgement of the stunning, undeniable truth spoken by a child. Later, in a secluded hallway, James overheard Victor's voice, no longer charming, but low and venomous. First he questions my leadership. He seethed to an associate. Then he sends his little charity case, his little street urchin, to publicly humiliate me. In front of Walter Simmons, I will not just ruin him. I will bury him. Back in the quiet of their apartment, the adrenaline of the evening began to fade, replaced by a sense of unease. James tucked Sophia into bed, but hours later he found her standing in front of the whiteboard in her pajamas. She had reproduced the core of Blackwood's flawed algorithm from memory. She wasn't looking at him. She was just staring at the numbers, her small hand tracing the lines of data. The patterns, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. They're like the ones I used to watch for on the street. James felt a chill snake down his spine. What do you mean, honey? She finally turned to face him, her eyes dark with a fear he hadn't seen since their first night together. The patterns men make when they're watching you, when they think you don't see them, the ones that mean you have to run. She looked from the whiteboard to his face. His numbers feel like that, Dad. They feel unsafe. And in that moment, James Reynolds knew. This wasn't just about a flawed business model or a callous CEO. It was about something far more sinister. It was about a predator, and his daughter had just seen him hiding in plain sight. The whiteboard in their living room looked like the ravings of a beautiful mind. It was a chaotic tapestry of stock tickers, algebraic variables, and graceful arcing lines that connected seemingly random data points. It was Sophia's world, and James was merely a visitor. I can feel the shape of it, Sophia said one evening, tapping a sequence of numbers with her finger. But I can't see the engine. The code is buried too deep behind layers of encryption I don't recognize. James nodded, a familiar sense of helplessness creeping in. He understood the strategy of finance, the art of the deal, but the raw technical architecture of Blackwood's digital kingdom was a foreign language. They were standing at the edge of a fortress, and they had no key. "We're flying blind, Sophia," he said, his voice low. "We need a pilot, someone who helped build the ship." There was only one name on that list, Sarah Lawson. Finding her wasn't easy. She had fallen off the corporate map after refusing Victor's generous offer to join his new company. James finally tracked her down to a small, struggling cybersecurity firm in a nondescript building on the West Loop. The sign on the door was peeling, and the office inside was a world away from the gleaming chrome and glass she used to command at Reynolds Financial. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment he saw the ghost of the powerhouse executive she once was. It was quickly replaced by a weary, guarded expression. "James Reynolds," she said, her voice flat. "I wondered if you'd ever surface." He laid it all out for her. The gala, Sophia's impossible insight, the patterns on the whiteboard. He spoke of the ghost in the machine, the feeling that the company's collapse wasn't a failure, but a design. Sarah listened without interruption, her sharp eyes scanning the rudimentary charts he'd brought. She picked up a printout of Sophia's whiteboard notes. Her expression shifted from doubt to a focused, dangerous intensity. "These transaction signatures," she murmured, tracing a line with her pen. "They're masked with a protocol I designed, a protocol that was supposed to be discontinued." She looked up at him, a fire igniting in her eyes. I always knew it was too clean. Victor is meticulous, but he's arrogant. He reused my work. She stood up, the weariness gone, replaced by the energy of a warrior who had just been handed a sword. You need a secure workspace, and more processing power than you can afford. She gestured around her small office. It's not much, but he'll never look for you here. To him, she added with a grim smile, I'm just another casualty he left behind. Their new headquarters buzzed with a quiet, purposeful energy. The small conference room became their war room, its walls quickly covered in printouts and timelines. At the center of it all was the trio, James providing the financial context, Sarah decrypting the system's architecture, and Sophia, the oracle, seeing connections that the two adults with all their experience had missed. One afternoon, James stood before the whiteboard, trying to map out Blackwood's network of shell corporations. He slipped into old habits, his voice taking on the familiar cadence of the boardroom. Okay, team, he announced. We need to leverage our core competencies to create a synergistic paradigm shift against Blackwood's enterprise. Sophia stopped writing, looked up at Sarah with a puzzled expression, and asked, Does that mean we need to find a way to tell everyone he's a liar? Sarah let out a short, sharp laugh. It was the first time James had seen her truly smile. Yes, sweetie, she said, winking at Sophia. That's exactly what it means. Your dad just uses more expensive words. The moment of levity was welcome, because as the days turned into weeks, the pressure began to mount. The outside world started to feel threatening. It came in the form of phone calls from Rebecca Harper, the social worker. Her check-ins became more frequent, her questions more probing. Just making sure everything is stable, James. How is Sophia's homeschooling going? I heard she might be getting some private tutoring. The question so casually delivered made James's skin crawl. How could she have known that he became more cautious, varying their routes to and from Sarah's office, always checking the rearview mirror? He felt the unnerving sensation of being watched a ghost from his past life that he thought he had left behind. The discovery came late one night. They were deep inside Blackwood's transaction logs, a digital labyrinth of numbers. Sarah was trying to brute force a password on a heavily encrypted file. Sophia, however, wasn't looking at the file. She was staring at the network activity monitor, her head tilted. That's strange, she said quietly. What is it? Sarah asked, not looking up from her screen. There's an outbound data stream, a tiny one. It's hiding behind the main system diagnostics. She pointed to a single pulsing line of code. It's sending a packet of information every 60 seconds. It's not part of the original system. It's listening. Sarah came over her face, paling slightly. It could be old corporate spyware, something they forgot to remove. But James saw the flicker of something in her eyes, a shadow that passed too quickly. He looked at the secure server humming in the corner, the one Sarah had provided. He looked at Sarah's tense, unreadable expression. He thought of Rebecca's probing questions. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening snap. He leaned down close to Sophia so that only she could hear his whisper, his voice barely audible over the hum of the server. I don't think it's old spyware, honey. His eyes were locked on Sarah. I think the call is coming from inside the house. The hum of the server filled the room, a low, steady thrum that suddenly sounded like a predator's purr. James's whisper hung in the air between them, colder and sharper than any winter wind. Sarah froze her fingers hovering over her keyboard. Her face, illuminated by the glow of the monitor, was a canvas of disbelief, then dawning horror, then pure, unadulterated panic. She didn't deny it. In her sudden, shattering silence, James found his answer. The listening post, Sarah. James said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The outbound stream. It's your signature, isn't it? A back door only you would know how to build." Sophia stood beside him, her small form rigid. She wasn't looking at the screen anymore. She was watching Sarah, her gaze not accusatory, but analytical, as if trying to solve one final terrible equation. "James, why?" Sarah started, her voice a fractured whisper. "You don't understand. I understand that we walked into a cage that you built." James countered, his own voice laced with the bitter sting of a second betrayal. He had allowed himself to trust again, and this was the price. A sudden frantic chime cut through the tension. A red notification flashed across one of Sarah's monitors, a small, discreet window she had coded herself. "Perimeter alert. Multiple unauthorized entry points detected. Sub-basement." Sarah's head snapped towards the screen. Her blood ran cold. "He's here." She breathed, her professional composure completely gone, replaced by the raw terror of a cornered animal. He wasn't supposed to move this fast. "He knew you were here. He knew." "Of course he knew," James said, grabbing Sophia's backpack. "You told him." "No," Sarah cried, whipping around to face him, tears finally breaking free and streaming down her face. "Not like that. You think I wanted this?" Her hands trembled as she gestured wildly around the office. "He found me, James, months ago. He didn't offer me a job. He offered me a choice." The sound of a heavy fire door slamming shut in the stairwell below echoed up to their floor. They were out of time. Sarah's confession came in a frantic, desperate torrent. "It's my father," she sobbed. "He's on dialysis 3 times a week. Years ago there was a billing error with his Medicare, a simple clerical mistake. But Victor, his people found it. They fabricated a paper trail, made it look like intentional fraud. He said he'd make it go away, or he'd send an anonymous tip to the federal investigators. My dad. He's 78 years old, James. He wouldn't survive a week in prison." The heavy thump, thump, thump of tactical boots was audible on the stairs now. They were only a floor below. In that instant, something inside Sarah snapped. The terrified victim vanished, and the brilliant, ferocious systems architect James remembered took her place. Her eyes, red with tears, were suddenly sharp with a plan, a desperate final gambit. "He's coming for you," she said, her voice low and urgent. "But he's expecting to find you here, with me. We use that." She flew across the room to the main server rack, the decoy. With a few keystrokes, she initiated a cascade of system failures designed to look like a frantic attempt to erase evidence. Red warning lights began to flash across the room. "This will trigger a full security lockdown and alert the building's main data center. It'll create chaos." She then darted to a loose floorboard beneath her desk, pulling out a single solid-state hard drive. She pressed it into James's hands. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "This is everything. The real server data, the off-site backups, the encrypted transaction logs. Everything. He doesn't know it exists." A loud metallic bang echoed from the hallway. They were trying to breach the door. "Sarah, come with us," James pleaded, pulling Sophia close. "No," she shot back, shoving them towards a small, unmarked service door behind a filing cabinet. "His men are looking for 2 people, you and me. He'll be focused on capturing me and securing the decoy server. It's the only head start I can give you. It's the only way this works." She looked at Sophia, her expression softening for just a fraction of a second. "I'm sorry, sweetie," she whispered. She slammed her hand down on a large red button beneath her desk. A piercing fire alarm blared to life, adding to the cacophony. "Now go!" She screamed over the noise, pushing them through the service door. The last thing James saw before the door swung shut was Sarah Lawson, standing tall in the flashing red lights of her office, turning to face the main entrance, ready to meet the storm she had unleashed. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind them, plunging them into the darkness of a dusty back stairwell. James clutched the hard drive to his chest as if it were a beating heart, grabbing Sophia's hand as they stumbled down the steps. The sound of the alarms of men shouting of splintering wood from their office door was all a terrifying blur. They burst out into a grimy back alley, the cold night air a shock to their lungs. They were fugitives now, running from an enemy with limitless resources. But as they disappeared into the shadows of the city, James held the one thing that mattered. It wasn't a weapon, it wasn't money. It was the truth. And it was heavier than he could ever have imagined. The world had shrunk to the size of a $20 motel room that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. For 3 weeks, this was their universe. Their days were a blur of encrypted data and takeout containers, the curtains permanently drawn against the outside world. The hard drive, now their most sacred object, was connected to a powerful laptop Sarah had insisted they buy its screen, a constant portal into the digital heart of Victor Blackwood's crimes. James watched mesmerized as Sophia navigated the labyrinthine code with an instinct he could only describe as supernatural. She didn't just read the data. She felt its rhythm, its pulse, and she knew when it was lying. They communicated with Sarah through a heavily encrypted channel she had built. Her face would appear on the screen, looking tired but resolute from her own undisclosed location. One evening after Sophia had unraveled a particularly complex shell corporation scheme, Sarah just stared, her mouth agape. How does she do that? She breathed her voice, a mixture of awe and disbelief. I've been a systems architect for 20 years, and I've never seen anyone process data like her. How do you even keep up? James looked over at Sophia, who was now completely absorbed in a cup of instant noodles, and a rare, genuine smile touched his face. Oh, my role is very strategic, he said, his tone dry. I'm the chief officer of juice boxes and the senior vice president of snack distribution. It's a high-pressure job. Sarah laughed, a real warm sound that felt like a ray of sunshine in their dim little room. It was a brief moment of normalcy in their surreal existence, a reminder of the strange, beautiful family they had become in the crucible of chaos. But James knew they couldn't hide forever. Hiding was defense. It was time to go on the offensive. Under the fluorescent lights of a public library, an hour away smelling of old paper and dust, James put their plan into motion. Using an anonymous public terminal, he uploaded a meticulously crafted white paper to an obscure, high-level financial theory forum. He didn't name Blackwood, he didn't name the company. He simply detailed with cold academic precision a theoretical methodology for using an AI efficiency model as a smokescreen for systemic algorithmic fraud. It was a flare shot into the darkness, a message only a select few would understand, and one of them was Victor Blackwood. He found James 2 days later. There was no threatening phone call, no black car, just a simple text on the burner phone, Lincoln Park, the bench by the pond, alone. James went. He told Sophia he was going for a walk, a lie that tasted like poison on his tongue. He saw Victor sitting on the bench, feeding the pigeons, looking for all the world like a retired gentleman, enjoying the afternoon sun. But as James approached, he saw the cold, reptilian stillness in his eyes. "You've been busy," Victor said without preamble, tossing a piece of bread to the birds. "I've had time on my hands," James replied, sitting at the opposite end of the bench. "This crusade of yours. It's admirable in a foolish sort of way." Victor continued, his voice calm, reasonable. "But it's putting the girl in danger. You know that, don't you? The people I work with. They aren't as sentimental as I am. They see loose ends, they tie them. He finally turned to look at James, his face a mask of feigned concern. I want to offer you a solution, a way out for you and for her. He slid a small polished stone across the bench. It was a crypto wallet. On this is the key to an account holding $4.7 billion. Untraceable. It's half of what I recovered. James stared at the stone. It was smooth, cold, and impossibly heavy. Take it, James Victor urged, his voice dropping to a persuasive whisper. Disappear. Give the girl the life she deserves. The best school's a house with a yard safety. No more running. No more looking over your shoulder. All you have to do is give me the hard drive and forget any of this ever happened. It's a simple business decision. The words hung in the air, a venomous temptation. Safety. A future for Sophia. An end to this nightmare. That night, James didn't sleep. He lay on the lumpy motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the crypto wallet a cold, heavy presence on the nightstand. The number echoed in his mind. 4.7 billion. It was a godlike sum. It was freedom. It was the price of his silence. He thought of the life he could give Sophia. A life of privilege and opportunity. A world away from cheap motels and the fear of a knock on the door. He could protect her, insulate her from all the world's ugliness. Wasn't that a father's most important duty? But then he thought of Sarah, who had sacrificed her own freedom to give them a head start. He thought of the thousands of employees whose lives Victor had shattered without a second thought. And he thought of his promise in the courtroom, the promise of a second chance, a life of integrity. He quietly rose and walked over to where Sophia was sleeping on the other bed, the covers pulled up to her chin. In the dim light from the flickering neon sign outside, her face was so peaceful, so trusting. He realized with a clarity that cut through all the fear and temptation that accepting Victor's money would be the ultimate betrayal. He would be teaching her that justice had a price, that their principles were for sale. He would be building her safe, beautiful future on a foundation of the dirtiest lie imaginable. He would be giving her a world of comfort, but he would be taking her soul. He looked at his daughter, his moral compass, his reason for everything. The choice which had seemed so complex was suddenly painfully simple. He walked back to the nightstand, picked up the burner phone, and opened the message from Victor. His thumb hovered over the screen, steady and sure. He typed a single word. No. He pressed send. The message was gone. There was no going back. The war had just been declared. James's one-word reply to Victor Blackwood was not the end of the war. It was the beginning of the final, most dangerous battle. He had expected retaliation threats, intimidation, another attempt to capture them. What came next was far more insidious. It arrived not as a threat, but as an opportunity. An email forwarded from an old, compromised account belonging to Rebecca Harper landed in Sarah's secure inbox. It was from an institution James had never heard of, the International Lyceum for Gifted Minds. It was the email claimed a secluded elite academy in Switzerland, a haven for the world's most profound young intellects. They had been following Sophia's burgeoning legend in academic circles and wanted to offer her a full all-expenses-paid scholarship. A few days later, two of their representatives met with James and Sarah in the quiet, neutral lobby of a downtown hotel. They were not thugs. They were the opposite. A man and a woman impeccably dressed with warm smiles, calm voices, and resumes that listed PhDs from Cambridge and MIT. They spoke of nurturing Sophia's gift in a way that James, for all his love, knew he never could. "Mr. Reynolds, what you have done for Sophia is nothing short of heroic," said the woman, Dr. Alistair. "You saved her life. Our goal is to now help you save her future. A mind like hers, it doesn't belong in hiding. It belongs among its peers with access to resources that can truly change the world." They presented a brochure filled with images of a stunning campus nestled in the Swiss Alps of gleaming laboratories and of happy, brilliant children working alongside Nobel laureates. They spoke of custom-tailored curricula of protecting Sophia's childhood while allowing her intellect to soar. It was a perfect trap, and it was aimed directly at James's heart. For the first time since their journey began, James felt a deep, unnerving conflict. He looked at the brochure at the life of limitless potential it promised. Then he looked at their reality-cheap motel rooms looking over their shoulders, a life on the run. Was he being selfish? Was his desperate need to protect her actually holding her back from her destiny? "It's too perfect," James Sarah warned him later that night over their encrypted line. "It's a checkmate move. He's not trying to take her with force. He's making you give her away." "But what if it's real?" "Sarah," James argued, his voice strained. "What if I'm letting my fight with Victor rob her of the single greatest opportunity of her life?" They agreed to one final meeting to discuss the logistics. The representatives from the Lyceum were confident, their smiles relaxed. They believed they had won. James sat at the polished conference table, feeling torn and defeated. Sophia sat beside him, quieter than usual, her hands folded in her lap, simply observing. Dr. Alistair laid out the final papers. "We can have her on a private jet to Geneva by the end of the week. Her mentorship with Professor Anari on quantum string theory can begin immediately." James looked at Sophia. Her expression was unreadable. He took a deep breath, the taste of surrender bitter in his mouth. "It seems," he began, his voice heavy, "it seems this is the best path for her." "May I ask a question?" The small, clear voice cut through the room. Everyone turned to Sophia. She was looking at the male representative, Dr. Finch. "Of course, Sophia," he said, smiling indulgently. "Anything at all. Your brochure mentions a dedicated quantum computing laboratory with a 4,000-qubit processor." She began, her tone one of simple curiosity. "Given the current challenges with quantum decoherence and the Kelvin temperature required for that level of stability, what specific type of cryogenic system and error correction algorithm are you using?" Dr. Finch's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Well, that is a highly technical matter, managed by our engineering team, of course. It's a proprietary system," I see Sophia said, nodding slowly. "And in the financial prospectus, your endowment's growth is projected at a steady 18% year over year to fund these programs. This projection is based on a proprietary algorithmic trading model. Correct? Yes, that's right." Dr. Alistair jumped in, trying to regain control. "It's the cornerstone of our foundation's financial strength. The problem," Sophia said, her voice still gentle but now holding an edge of cold, hard logic, "is that I ran a simulation based on the public components of your investment philosophy outlined in this very binder. To achieve an 18% return with your stated risk aversion parameters, your algorithm would need to successfully predict and exploit market microfluctuations with a success rate of 98.6%. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "That isn't just improbable," she continued, her eyes sweeping over their stunned faces. "It's a mathematical impossibility. It defies the fundamental laws of market dynamics and information theory. The only way to guarantee returns like that is if the game is rigged from the inside." She picked up a beautiful glossy photo of the campus from the table. And this campus in the Alps. The architecture is lovely. But the solar array you've pictured on the roof of the main hall would never be able to power the cryogenic systems needed for the quantum lab, not with the average number of sunlight hours at that specific altitude and latitude. You'd have a net energy deficit of 32%. The lights wouldn't even stay on. She placed the photo back on the table, a final damning piece of evidence. The representatives sat frozen, their professional masks completely shattered, revealing the hollow shock underneath. They had been so focused on creating a perfect emotional trap for the father, they had completely underestimated the mind of the child. Sophia looked from one to the other, her gaze clear and unwavering. There was no anger in her voice, only the quiet finality of a solved equation. "Mr. Blackwood is very creative with his numbers," she said, "but he really should have checked them twice." She leaned forward just slightly. "He sent you, didn't he, checkmate?" The empire had just been toppled not by an army, but by a little girl in a conference room who had done the math. The fallout was not a storm, it was a detonation. The moment the two representatives from the Lyceum walked out of that conference room, their faces pale and slack with shock, the world began to move at a dizzying speed. Sarah Lawson, granted full immunity for her testimony, walked into the Chicago field office of the SEC and handed over the hard drive. What followed was a swift and brutal corporate autopsy, played out on every news channel in the country. Headlines flashed across screens. Blackwood Capital implodes overnight. CEO Victor Blackwood arrested in sweeping algorithmic fraud scheme. The Phoenix AI revolutionary model or billion-dollar lie. The most viral story, however, was the one whispered in disbelief, the one that captured the public's imagination. It was the story of the brilliant reclusive systems architect, the disgraced COO, left for dead, and the little girl who had started it all. They called her the Origami Oracle, the child prodigy who saw the truth in the numbers. James watched on television as Victor Blackwood, the man who had radiated such supreme confidence, was led from his marble-floored office in handcuffs. The mask was finally gone. In its place was the raw, impotent fury of a king whose empire had been dismantled by a whisper. Poh. 1 year later, the echoes of that detonation had faded, replaced by a quiet, steady peace. It was a crisp autumn afternoon. The sun, warm and golden, filtered through the trees in Lincoln Park. James and Sophia stood on the sidewalk by the bookstore on the exact spot where he had first seen her. The awning was still the same faded green, but everything else was different. Sophia was taller now, the wariness in her eyes replaced by the easy confidence of a child who knows she is loved, who knows she is safe. She no longer flinched at loud noises. She no longer hid food in her pockets. "It's strange," she said, looking at the spot on the pavement where she used to lay out her paper animals. "It feels like 100 years ago." Sometimes the most important moments of our lives happen in the most ordinary places, James replied, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. He was different, too. The haunted, hunted look was gone. The lines of bitterness around his mouth had softened into a gentle, permanent smile. He was no longer a ghost. He was a father. He had received offers, of course, lucrative consulting gigs, board positions, chances to reclaim a sliver of his old life. He had politely declined them all. His work now was quieter, more meaningful. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, a genuine smile spreading across his face as he read the screen. "Look at this," he said, kneeling down to show the phone to Sophia. It was an email from the non-profit they had established, with a portion of the recovered funds, an organization they had named the Phoenix Foundation. The subject line read, "Inaugural Sophia Scholarship awarded. On the screen was a picture of a smiling, gap-toothed 10-year-old boy from a low-income neighborhood in Detroit, proudly holding up a certificate. The caption underneath read that the boy, a local math whiz, would now have the funding to attend a specialized science and technology high school his family could never have afforded. Sophia stared at the boy's joyful face, and then she looked up at James, her own eyes shining with a light brighter than any city skyline. James wrapped an arm around her, pulling her into a tight hug. He looked past the bookstore, past the park, towards the towering skyscrapers of downtown Chicago that no longer held any power over him. That Sophia, he said, his voice, thick with an emotion so profound it felt like a prayer. That is a legacy worth having. They stood there for a long moment, a former millionaire and a former orphan, two survivors who had walked through the fire and found something far more valuable than wealth on the other side. They had found purpose. They had found family. And in the warm autumn sun, surrounded by the gentle hum of the city, they had finally truly found peace. And so a quiet corner on a busy Chicago street becomes a monument, not to a fallen empire of glass and steel, but to a rising one built on courage and compassion. The story of James and Sophia reminds us that sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to finally find everything you actually need. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What is a true legacy? Is it the name we build for ourselves? Or is it the seeds of hope we plant in the lives of others? Hoping one day they will grow into a forest we may never see. This journey of James and Sophia truly touched our hearts, and we believe stories like these that explore the deepest meanings of redemption and purpose are more important than ever. Now we'd love to hear from you. What do you believe was the single moment that truly defined James's redemption? Was it the moment he chose to adopt Sophia, the night he refused billions of dollars or something else entirely? Share your perspective in the comments below. Your insight is what makes this community so special. We also read every comment, and your feedback is the blueprint for our future stories. If there was a part you loved, or a moment you think we could have told differently, please let us know. If this story resonated with you, leaving a like is a wonderful way to show it. And if you feel someone in your life might need to hear a message about second chances, consider sharing it with them. To continue exploring powerful stories that search for the heart of the human experience, make sure you subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. You won't want to miss the journey we have planned next. For now, feel free to discover another one of our stories on your screen. Thank you for being here with us. Until next time, take care.